So, welcome everyone. This is the third session of our webinar series, The Foundational Concepts of Youth Engagement. And this is our closing session. This is the last one. We talked a lot about, the concepts of youth identity and how youth identity can also have portions of like oppression in their experience, especially when we're talking about adultism. And we really got into a lot of those concepts. And our last session as well, we started to go a little more into power dynamics, more details into how that shows up, how we can work to dismantle those power dynamics through our practices as well. But this is going to be the end of the session where we're really talking about, how do we apply all of that knowledge that we've been talking about? How do we create those safe spaces that create more opportunities for youth to feel that they are able to really express their power and their voices and want to really have a high amount of involvement because again they feel listened to, heard, and valued in this space. And that's really what this is about. And the outcome of this session is that we are going to be able to put some of these things into practice, right? And actually have that hands-on experience too through this session. So that's what we are hoping for. All right, so I will go ahead and get started. All right. And just again, want to put it out there, big thank you to this collaborative process, to everyone that's been involved. We have Ravina Soto from the Tribal Community Coordinating Center. She couldn't be here today. She's going to be on the panel, so kind of giving her applause if she does see this recording. Shout out to you. I believe it already started, so we're sending those good vibes to her. And then also we have Kale Alahua from the LGBTQ Center in Orange County. So just expressing that appreciation and thank you. And so everyone does understand this was a collaborative process. And also, again, I always forget, my name is Ignacio Burgos. I'm with California Youth Advocacy Network. So we're all happy to have you here today. And yeah, this wouldn't be possible without this collective work together and with our communities. Right. So the place that we want to begin is really talking about that sense of belonging, especially if we're talking about creating spaces for safety. Right. And this is a big foundation of that sense of safety when people feel that they belong in a space, that they belong to a community, that they are seen and their experiences and their voices validated. But I'm going to go ahead and read this definition from Cambridge Dictionary, just so that, again, we're on that same page. So what does it mean to belong? What is that definition? So it is a feeling of being happy or comfortable as part of a particular group and having a good relationship with the other members of the group because they welcome you and accept you. And again, that key word with good relationship. Remember how in the first session when we were talking about intersectionality, how a lot of us have our many different identities, but really what's at the center of our identities is our relationship to our environments. Okay, so not everyone has a healthy relationship to different environments, but what we can do in our spaces here when we're working with young people is create an environment where that relationship is strong and a healthy one. And this can be a place that young people, again, feel safe to be able to voice their opinions, their concerns, the things, the visions that they have for the future, where it's not so much accepted, sometimes based on their identity too, it's not accepted in other environments. Okay, so, and also want to point this out at the bottom too. So a sense of belonging is one of humanity's most basic needs. So again, making that statement that it is a foundational aspect of our well-being. So really want to instill that in everyone. But if we're also talking about youth and in particular the youth experience, it's important to understand that a lot of times when we work with young people, whether that is through those foundational ages, like basically into middle school, into high school, and even transitional ages outside of that, something that we forget as adults from our adult perspective is that, young people are going through so many shifting environments on a regular basis. The conditions change. Their friends and the adults that they are engaging with change on a regular basis, because this is usually a very natural part of that development within the youth experience, from going to different schools, going to different environments with again, building friendships and things like that, and really developing their identity. So in a sense, the youth experience can feel a lot less stable when we're talking about having that sense of belonging. So young people are always really trying to gain that part of their well-being and that safety, and it can be very difficult. So that's something to consider when we're talking about, again, the youth experience specifically, and not applying our assumptions through the adult perspective of this experience with finding belonging, right? And again, we already talked about this, but that sense of belonging definitely is connected with our personal sense of value, okay? And then we talked about that in the last session. We were talking about how our self-worth is a form of power. That's our power within. And the more that we have the power within, our sense of self-worth, and understanding that we have that sense of belonging in community, then that is going to encourage us and really develop our ability to speak, and to advocate for ourselves and to show up in a space. So all of that is very much so connected. And we see that with a lot of articles and data out there. I've got this reference right here that really talks about the whole history of when we start to bring that into the conversation, with especially the psychological aspects within education and our educational environments for young people, right? So how important that sense of belonging is, and the contributing factors long term that happen when young people do have that sense of belonging, how it can impact, even to the point of their academic success, their again, well-being, and even to where they are less likely to take risky behavior when they have a stronger sense of belonging. So all of these are just some factors that can be benefits, right? And what there's something that we want to share with you too in this aspect, and it's really pulling from a book, some reading, which is the Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. But this quote is from Morgan Man Willis, and they really connect that sense of belonging to nature. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to read this, but then I'm going to have everyone get into breakout rooms so that you all can sort of break this apart, read it together, and really pull from it your connection to this reading in reference to youth engagement and creating that sense of belonging. Okay, so I'll read it once so that that gives you time to process, and then we'll get into breakout rooms to go over it again. Okay, so here it goes. I believe in the honesty of trees. I, like many organizers, have spent a lot of time processing the notion that anything worth its outcome involves everyone's priorities, desires, visions, and perspectives in every phase and around every decision. I look at the anatomy of trees as one of nature's examples of successful organizing that realizes that our power is in our ability to both be fiercely centered and grounded, but also infinitely reaching towards our unique sources of energy, light, and growth. Each tree's elements are reliant on one another, but totally unique in form and function. There's no competition or pressure to be the root or the trunk or the buds that bloom. Each tree is a universe, a master delegator, a puzzle, and a puzzle piece. They have encouraged me to not worry so much about making everyone feel important, and to focus on how to create systems and support efforts where everyone is important and clear on how their work is unique, crucial, and totally interconnected. All right. So this is what I'm going to do. Let me go ahead and copy this link here. And I'm going to put it into the chat. And Amanda, could you create breakout rooms for 3 to 4 people? Or
Yeah.
we can do 4 to 5. 4 to 5. That should be good. All right. So we're going to create these breakout rooms again. And I shared that link so that you all can read through this quote on your, in your own pace. Yeah, at your own pace, and then share with your group. And the question that I want to ask you, and then when we come back, we can talk about this and we'll go over these questions again. But I want you all to discuss within your space, right? So how does the author here, Morgan Van Willis, how do they use nature to express a safe space, right? So where do we see that sense of belonging, like I was saying, and what we've talked about in our previous sessions? And also, how can the sentiment in this quote apply to your own connections with young people? So do you see any relations in this text with your own practices, even where maybe you've seen challenges or where you haven't seen that taking place within the environment? So speak on that and share your stories, because that's always very important in us having that collective knowledge. Okay, so I think we can go ahead and open those breakouts. Everyone is back. I hope that you did have time to really receive this message and talk about it, discuss it amongst your group. And now I wanted to go back over those questions and we can share as a group, but we don't have to just go off of these questions. If there's anything else that you feel called to say or respond to in reference to this reading, I'd love to hear that too. But I'll just repeat the questions just to center us again around what the original intention was. So it goes, so first question is, how does the author, so how do they use nature to express a safe space, right? And we talked about that sense of belonging. And we've also talked about previously about dismantling like power dynamics, right? Getting rid of that hierarchy, especially in the space with adults and young people. The second question is, how does or can the sentiments in this quote apply to your own connections with youth or young adults and young people in general? So I'd love to hear what came out, what was generated from your conversations. And thank you, Raider, for sharing your resource. I'll definitely check those out. Were there any takeaways or anything that connected with you in the reading at all, or in your conversation that came about?
They are all shy today. So in our group, we talk about how the nature, how nature they put it in there and how they get together, and also they have their own space and the importance of for everybody to be there. So it was a perfect analogy or a perfect way to show how everybody is important and everybody has their space.
Thank you, Nancy. Anyone else? Can we get one more add-on if anyone feels called to? If not, I will move forward.
Yeah, I can say what we talked a little bit about. I think for us, it was it really related to kind of seeing our youth kind of grow, after, from the very beginning where they're, they could be a little shy, they might be a little bit nervous, not as confident in what we're doing or talking about, and just seeing them grow as leaders, that really resonated with me with this quote, and kind of just being able to see them kind of going from the shy kid to the confident leader and speakers, and then they once youth once they get older, having new students or new youth coming in, and now they're teaching them and being
yes,
so that's just kind of like how everything's like really connected with our youth. And so Yeah, that's kind of what came to mind with this quote.
Awesome. So thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Benny. Leave space if there's anyone else that wants to respond to anything that was said.
I can share.
Yeah, thanks, Kimberly.
We talked about the part that really resonated with me was to focus on creating a system where everyone is important, not just feels important.
Mm-hmm.
And I was sharing how when I first started working with a youth coalition, one of my coworkers had a really successful coalition, so I asked for her advice. And this was kind of the advice that she gave me, which was just to give the youth ownership of the coalition, like make sure that it's theirs and you're just kind of there as support. And I felt like that was really helpful. And it was a great coalition that I had the opportunity to work with. And that was probably the best advice that I got. So that part stood out to me.
That is awesome. Thank you. And I love that too, of course, right? So, and very much so in line with everything we've been talking about, right? So really making sure that we give ownership, right? Or allow provide that space for young people to have ownership of any of these projects, any of these processes that we are making, which is very, very important. And Kimberly, I can relate to you too, because I believe early on in my first steps with working with young people, I can even recall times where it was like me stating that this is important and this matters because, but then did I take the moment to ask them, like, does this matter to you? And why is it important for you? Because of course that's going to be a different reason. And also, did I do that work then to give them that ownership and give them the agency to feel or not feel again, to be important and to matter in the process, right? So that was growing pains for myself as well. So I definitely relate to that as well. Okay. All right. I think if that's everyone's sort of everything that everyone feels called to say, I'll go ahead and move forward. But appreciate it. Thank you for sharing some of your responses and your connections to this reading. But yeah, and I also want us to really consider that, especially when we're thinking of, right, not just our communities, but our own environment that we're creating as an ecosystem, right? So where we are all interdependent, we all are important, we all matter, we all have our strengths, we all have our purposes, our visions, right? So it's how do we really bring that all together through one vision, and that is always absolutely possible. But again, it's about making sure that everyone has the space to actually bring themselves, their best selves, right, forward and be able to be seen and heard and feel that they are in charge of the direction and the outcomes that are taking place. Okay, so just bringing it back to that topic and the concept of intersectionality, because we always have to remember that many times we may group all young people, youth, the kids I'm working with as one body, right? But just with any identity, right? Youth identity, it's not a monolith. Each and every one of the young people that we're working with, they are their own whole person. And especially as we're talking about with that quote about every single piece of that ecosystem within that forest, every part of that tree has its role that is valid and so crucial in making sure that every other piece is surviving and able to grow and be able to, yeah, just glow as well in that space. Okay. All right. And another thing to talk about, especially when we're talking about those spaces of belonging, we need to also understand and acknowledge that conflict is inevitable. It's going to happen. And if we were to define conflict in simple terms, it's basically anytime that there are disagreements, anytime people might be butting heads, or when someone might sort of feel conflicted with some of the direction that we are heading in our group, right? But what matters most is not, we can't remove conflict, we can't get rid of conflict, right? The conflict is not a bad thing, it helps us to grow, it helps us to navigate challenges. However, what matters is the environment that we have. If we have an environment with healthy relationships where everyone does feel safe and everyone does feel like they belong, then it's going to make navigating those conflicts so much easier. Okay. And a lot of that is because at the base of it, you've already built that foundation of trust among all of the participants. So that really what happens is that you are being aware and definitely putting time into making sure that everyone has that basis of trust and that that relational value between one another. Hey, and just to kind of put that as well, that should always take priority. We're going to be talking about some practices as well, things that you can do to create safe space, but the relationship that you all have together over any scope of work, over any whatever conflict is taking place, that strong relationship that you're building should always take priority. Because if you don't have the relationship with your youth that you're working with your staff, etc., anyone that's involved in this process, if you don't build that relationship, then it's not going to be successful moving forward. It's not going to be sustainable because, again, that trust is not carrying all of the challenges in the future that are going to take place. And another thing, and this to do any studies where we're looking at intergenerational impacts. So basically the benefit of having adults being partners with youth, right? And how we both can really benefit each other from our perspectives and our experiences. But it's not from a single instance. So I want to put it into your mind as well that it takes a lot of intention, of consistency about having those sustained intentions over the long term. That's when we're going to get the impacts. So really be mindful of the spaces you are creating. Anytime that you're bringing people together, there should be a reason behind that. Any activity that you're doing, there should be a reason behind that. Any time that you're calling youth into a space, again, there should be a reason behind that. Okay. So we need to be sure to really have that intentionality from the beginning and long term. So have that good consistency to build trust. All right, so beyond that, one big aspect of creating an environment where young people feel safe and that they belong is really, as Kimberly said, making sure that they have control, right? And that this is where we are taking a restorative approach to decision making with young people, right? So it is not, and we talked about this too, we're not really pulling on our power as adults. We are working with young people. So we're not making decisions for them, right? We're not making decisions upon them against their consent. We are talking to them, discussing with them, doing a vibe check with them, asking what are their ideas, what are their visions, how do you think we can move forward in this decision, and what do you think is going to work best for you as well, right? So we can all show up in that space, but really bringing young people along that that process of making decisions is so important. And then, yeah, and this is really in general, like no matter what you're doing, the more that participants, and especially young people, the more that they feel that they are in control of the outcomes and the direction, then they're going to have more engagement. They're going to feel more inclined to continue to contribute to the process and the project, okay? Right, so one place that we can begin with establishing those consistent sort of values that we have among our group and making sure that we have that sustained interest is really taking time to do those community agreements. And I want to differentiate between a couple of these terms, right? Because a lot of times coming to space, we may think that, oh, we have agreements. These are the laws, the rules that we all are supposed to abide by. We created them as an agency, and the youth, they know what those expectations are. So they should be following along with that. There shouldn't be any problem, right? We have transparency. However, we need to understand that rules are a form of authority, okay? So a lot of times when we're creating rules, what's happening is we are using that power dynamic and using that authority again as that power over young people. The other term that I want us to understand is, well, if we just put young people together in the space, they'll figure it out. We'll all get along. Of course, it's common sense. We know how to treat each other well. We know how to be respectful. However, that again is not having the intersectional lens and understanding that those norms can come with so many biases, can have already instilled within our normal practices and the common sense that can have those unequal power dynamics already taking place. So we can't only rely on norms either. Okay. So that's why, just like when we're talking about that inclusive decision-making process, we need to apply that when we're coming up with our community agreements. And that's what agreements are all about. It's building a consensus within your community, a collective agreement, and it's a collective process. So you are involving everyone in that process, again, to where they are coming up and they're producing and sharing what their values are for them, what matters to them as well. The even the vision that they have for this group, how they want to engage with one another, how they want to go through a certain process. And I can talk about a personal story here in a little bit too. Okay, so beyond that, two things to think about when you are creating your community agreements. And I don't want this to be, this is more of a guide. I don't want to put it out there that, if we have sort of community agreements that might have humor to it or anything like that, that doesn't count. That is not at all what I'm saying, because really, if it's coming from a community, it's going to make sense as long as everyone is part of it. But I want you to also keep in your mind as a facilitator and make sure that you have both of these types of agreements in place, because it's important to really talk about what are the processes that we're going to have in this group. Like, how do we go about making decisions? How do we go about choosing what project we want to do? Right? How do we go about resolving conflict? Like, what are the agreed ways that we're going to work through that? So those are operational agreements, right? So it's important to make sure that you have those within your agreements as well. If you are going through your community agreements with your group and you're realizing that you didn't really talk about any of these things, of course, community agreements can always change, but sort of do some work to ask those questions. Like, again, how do we go about this? I know you said that we want to have this type of environment, but what are we going to do to create that? Right? What are we going to do to sustain that long term within our group? So those are important questions to ask. The other bit, and again, I have the asterisk there, that will always need to take priority are those relational agreements, right? So how do we interact with one another, right? Another one is don't yuck my yum. That's a common one. Everyone has, like stand up, sit down, kind of give space for everyone to speak, but also take time to make sure everyone actually knows what all those terms mean, that we're all on the same page of how that shows up in the space. That's important conversation to have as well. So we have those terms, but don't just stick with those idioms, right? Those statements or those common terms. Ask, go a little further, and doing that really does help to, again, sustain a space to where everyone has that expectation of what needs to be present for everyone to feel like they belong and everyone is safe in the room. Okay, and I will go over. Here's one example, and this is from my youth board, and this is something we came up with, and it is pretty long, but I've shared before, and I will share again. Like, I make sure not to do too much brevity or sort of snipping away what my young people say. I try to have it all be there. I try to clean it up as a facilitator and kind of organize it and make it make sense. But I leave everything that they said there. And so I might try to shorten sentence to make it make sense, but I really make sure that everything that they said is present. So one instance when we were talking about how we handle conflict, we said that our goal is to make space for us to work along the middle line. So really working with that cooperation and understanding. If we ever have opposing opinions about a decision or topic, we agree to open the discussion further, right? So that, again, they said in the beginning, we want to meet in the middle, right? So I asked, okay, well, what does that mean? How does that show up? And then that's when we came up with that second part. Well, if we ever are kind of having a disagreement, we want to actually talk about it. We don't want it just to turn into conflict or an argument. I was like, okay, that's great. So that's a wonderful practice that we can do. Anytime that we have conflict, let's sit down in a circle and then let's open up the discussion to everyone, right? So then we also said this, and this is more of an operational versus a relational. In our process of making decisions, we wish to prioritize discussion first. If our discussion does not have a clear direction, then we agree to move forward with a vote. Further, if a vote still is not able to provide a clear answer, we entrust CYA and staff to facilitate a solution. So again, us coming in as staff and as adults coming in to say, okay, so after hearing everything, after going through this process, we had votes, we still haven't had a resolution, but here is a solution that we are providing, and we think this will work best because of yada yada yada. But the important thing is that they said and they stated that that is what they're okay with. That's what they want us to do. So it's not us using our power. It's coming in as a partner and going through this process based on what the youth envisioned for this process. Okay. So again, it's important to ask those questions throughout that process. So we save time. I don't need to, I'm not going to read this third one, but I hope everyone is kind of getting what I'm getting, or yeah, is understanding where I'm getting by describing the difference between, relational, operational, but also big time understanding the difference between, making those rules, but actually having these community agreements and really challenging the youth we're working with to explain and go a little deeper. Okay. So another thing to consider when we are creating that space and we are making decisions as a group, right? Something that we tend to that comes easy is, all right, so what is the highest vote, or what does the majority feel? But we have to also understand that in that space, especially with the intersectional lens, sometimes some people's viewpoints or their experiences may be marginalized, so we have to be sensitive to that. So do understand that having the majority agree on something does not always mean that it is inclusive. Okay, so even though we may have the majority agree on something, make space to where anyone that doesn't agree or feels conflicted in that space is able to speak up if they're comfortable, right? So if you are building that trust and that safe space, it's going to create that space to where they should feel comfortable to say, okay, well, actually, I don't agree with this, but I just want to let it be known. And then they can decide if they want to give that consent to move forward, right? But we do absolutely need to make that space so everyone's voice is heard. And then, yeah, just again, that whole collective piece, just as I've been saying, the more that you're taking part in these collective efforts, you're going to have more engagement, more involvement with your young people. Again, it's creating a more sustainable space and more sustainable coalition long term. Okay, so I'm just going to go over some of the decision-making models, and these are three very common ones. The first one definitely being most common, which would be majority rule. So a lot of times that's like, okay, so we have our decision up here. We could do a campaign around the flavor ban, or we could do a campaign around smoke-free housing. So let's go ahead and see your hands. All right, the highest vote, that's the one we're going to do. That tends to be majority rule. And the wonderful thing about majority rule is that it's very easy to also do sort of private voting, to where you can have people anonymously vote with a piece of paper. They don't have to raise their hand and show what they're voting on. And that can be a strength, right? But one big challenge with majority vote, as I said in the last slide, is that there are times and spaces where maybe those that are not in the majority, again, feel marginalized, but their viewpoint and their conflict is very valid, and they may bring up some things that we really should consider going forward, right? The other process of making decisions is called a fair process. And basically, this is where you have one body that is, I guess, where it is their role to make the final decision. So this can be a single person, or this can be a group of people. It really depends on how you want to develop that and create that space. But the thing is that we are going through a process to where we are getting as much input from everyone. So we're basically collecting all the data that we can, and then we are going to make a decision based on that information of what makes the most sense. And then you kind of follow up with everyone and you say, okay, so how do you all feel about this decision? Do we want to move forward? Do we need to talk about it a little bit more? But no matter what, in the end, you have that decision-making body. So again, we can see how this can be sort of have that challenge too of marginalizing voices, but at least everyone gets to be heard. But sometimes this may be the best process to go forward, especially again, if it seems like you're hitting a dead end and we can't seem to get people agreeing to something, but we still need to move forward. At least everyone's voice is heard and we're trying to do the best that we can in this process, right? The third one, which would be consensus, which allows everyone's voice to be heard within this process. And also you get a little more in-depth conversation taking place with consensus. And basically, in order to move forward, you need consensus or you need approval or permission from everyone to say, yes, we're able to move forward. Okay. But I'm going to dig into these last two a little bit more. Okay. So just kind of go through that. So the first part, especially if we're talking about fair process, the great thing about this option is you do open a space for discussion and debate. That is very important to where everyone feels validated in what they're talking about, their experiences. So again, that is an inclusive process. The last bit is really anyone that is making the decision, you're going to explain to everyone, basically repeat back all of the collected information and then explain why you came up with your decision and why you're making your final or why you're making the decision the way that you are. Afterwards, what's important is that follow up and really making sure that everyone understands, okay, so now based off of this decision, we have certain action items, or we have a new rule or our new agreement or way of doing things, or maybe a new process. We want to make sure that everyone understands how this impacts everyone. Everyone understands their role and their expectations. So really making sure everyone is on the same page at the end is very important if you're using the FAIR process. That way, one, is transparent. And again, everyone, even though there is one decision body, everyone is still involved in every step of the process. And then the third one, which is consensus. It's important to understand that consensus does not mean it's a unanimous vote. Okay, so even if you might have people that disagree, however, they still provide permission to move forward. That's a very important thing to understand and differentiate with consensus. A lot of times the assumption is that, well, consensus means that everyone is involved and we're not going to get anywhere because not everyone's going to agree with the same thing. Okay, so again, we don't need everyone to absolutely agree. We can have disagreements, but we need everyone to provide permission to move forward. And just going through this is probably the most inclusive process to make decisions. It does take more time. However, again, if you have, the more that you have those inclusive practices where everyone is contributing to that process, again, the more engagement and involvement you're going to have. All right, and then just again, understanding that consensus is a collective process because you're making time and space for everyone to really apply their best knowledges, their past experiences, anything that they feel they need to bring up, or any foresight they may have if we're talking about a process or going forward with a certain campaign or choosing a certain design over another one. Okay. So just to give an example of getting consensus, one very easy way to do this is through the thumbs up, thumbs to the side, and thumbs down. Again, it's breaking that model of this or that. So we're expanding the options. So really it's, you state something, an agreement, and everyone has their thumbs up. That means, anyone with their thumbs up is saying, yes, absolutely, I love this idea, I'm down for it. Anyone with their thumb to the side is basically saying, I don't really love this idea. I have some conflicts there. And you're welcome to open a space for them to share that so that we can document that and keep that in mind through our process, right? And then thumbs down is basically where someone is saying, this, I'm absolutely not okay with this. I do not give permission for this to move forward because there's a foundational issue here, or something that is conflicting with my values, or my being, whatever. It's to the point that they feel so strongly that something needs to be changed. So what we do is we keep working on it. We keep adding to the discussion. We keep really developing this process until we don't get thumbs down. If we still have thumbs to the side, that's okay, because that means, again, they're giving permission to move forward, even if they may still have voiced conflicts with the process. Okay. All right. Now I think we're going to get into breakout rooms, because what we want to do is provide an opportunity for you all to look at some scenarios and talk about what do you think the best decision model would be, right? We can go ahead and do that. But I think I did want to, I'm just making sure we have enough time. I want to provide that example story. I'll be quick with it. Basically, there was a time with my youth board where we had a certain process of deciding who would do the roles for youth quests. Anyone that's familiar with youth quests, right? The roles are a very big deal, especially those that like to do the public speaking. But we were doing basically random draws out of a hat, and then it was whoever's name got pulled, they got to choose first, and we went down the line. However, one of my students was chosen last 2 years in a row. And so she started to voice, like, this is becoming a problem. Like, I feel like I haven't had any chance to choose. And I think the system that we have is a bit unfair. So instead of me being, the adult coordinator practicing adultism and shutting it down, like, this is the way we've done it for years, no one's ever complained. It was, okay, I hear you. Let's bring it up to the youth board. Let's talk about some solutions. So we opened up the discussion, and other youth board members felt, you know what, that's a good point. We do feel that it is unfair, and I think maybe we need to work on a way to go about this. So over a month, we tried to come up with some solutions, some different ideas, and we still couldn't come up with a solution. And it took a lot of time, but by the next time we all met and we were creating our new terms, group agreements, I said, okay, I took in everyone's advice and viewpoints and concerns with the decision-making and things that they would prefer. And then I provided with a new process. And I said, okay, how about we make it to where everyone gets to present their case. They get to say why they want to be in this position, how important it is, and even the reason for saying that they've been a part of the youth board for 3 years or 4 years and they haven't had a chance to do it before is a valid reason, right? So just making sure that everyone's voice is heard in the process, and then we all do an anonymous vote. So it's more turning it into a democratic process versus a random sort of tiered process. Everyone said, we agree with it. We all give our consent to move forward. This is how we want to go forward with our process of deciding the roles for Youth Quest. And that now has been the new way of going about it. But the point is that we use that consensus. Really, it was first consensus, but we still couldn't get consensus. So it turned into the FAIR process, which I, as the facilitator, said, okay, here's a solution. How do you all feel about this? And we were able to move forward. Okay. But you see how that went. It was a longer process, but the point is that everyone was receptive to it because everyone was involved in it and no one felt left out and no one felt marginalized in the process. Okay. Sorry, try to keep it short. So we're going to get into breakout rooms. You're going to be looking at your own process or these other scenarios and saying, what's going to be the best situation or best process for decision-making that we could use in this scenario. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy this link. I'll put it into the chat. If everyone could go ahead and open that. Thank you, Karina. Thanks for joining us. And again, yeah, if anyone ends up having to hop off, we do record these meetings, so you'll be able to jump back in. Okay, so Amanda, could you go ahead and open up the breakout rooms, and we'll put the timer for, we'll do a timer for 10 minutes. But if anyone has any takeaways from the session, going through some of those scenarios, is there anything that was sort of challenging going through that process? Anything that kind of threw you for a loop, or did it seem pretty easy to understand different decision-making models and what could work best? And it really changes depending on your environment too.
I think we didn't get to the third one, and I thought it was a bit tougher to get around that one.
The third scenario,
yeah, I guess it would involve more space to, to give voice on how to, I guess, compromise, in the smaller group giving ideas on what would they need to make a fit their needs.
Yeah. And just so everyone's understands too, the third scenario was where there was a topic about a design for the campaign or something. I think it was a logo. And basically, there was a few that had very strong opinions that option A did not work for various reasons. And they felt like option B would be better for a logo. And it was saying that we could not find consensus. That was an actual real scenario that happened to me previously, and it was over a logo. But in order to move forward, we had to move away from consensus because consensus was we couldn't get consensus. However, we still heard everyone's viewpoints, and anyone that said they were able to provide their concerns about option A. And we said, okay, well, let's keep that in mind going forward, and let's attribute or contribute some of those the issues that you have in our design of the logo going forward. So it kind of became a fair process, and they were okay with that versus consensus. So yeah, there are times where you have to kind of use a little bit of all at different stages, and that's totally fine as long as, again, everyone is taking part in the process and you have, again, their permission to move forward, even if you move into that space of a fair process. Does that help? Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm going to pass the baton to Kale.
Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Kale. My pronouns are she, they, and I'm with the LGBTQ Center Orange County. So right now we're going to be talking about community circles. And like what Ignacio said, the circle process is create an intentional space. So it's, again, all about creating that intentional space with those you work with, youth or beyond. And then so remove barriers between people. You want to make sure that everyone's there, and again, intentionally there for the same reasons, and we're all here to support each other, and prioritize positive relationships, and expectations involve collaboration. So allowing people to have the floor to speak and share their ideas and everything, and really acknowledge those ideas, because as much as it is an intentional space, definitely respond with the intent to be, you're supportive, you're like, yeah, let's talk about that more, let's get into more discussions, and then encourage mutual understanding. So if someone says something and it's kind of like, wait, can you walk me back through like how that process is? How can we go about like the logo? How can we come and find a common ground? Maybe we could push the logos together in a way or something. And then allow space for meaningful participation. Definitely check in with those you work with and ask them like, hey, how are you doing today? Where are you at? Do you have, like, I don't know if you've ever heard of the term, my partner and I use it all the time, where it's, do you have enough spoons to deal with the day or to deal with this heavy topic or something like that. And then also making sure that if you're saying something that could be triggering, definitely have those trigger warnings, and all of that can be like involved, especially with those of us who work with LGBTQ, or if you work with veterans or anyone with disabilities as well. It's definitely to keep all that in mind when creating these circles, making them available, and thinking about how it could be equitable for those who attend. And then what they are not, community circles are not used to force consensus, perceptions, or ideas. A circle facilitator's role is to guide the process with everyone. So again, we're working together. There's no someone's up here and everyone else is down here. It's not that type of situation. We're all on the same level, all on the same plane, and we're all trying to get to the same destination of understanding and figuring out what we all want to do as a group. And then, so with that said, the spectrum of circles, right? So you have proactive, responsive, and proactively responsive. So proactive circles are about building strong community and trusting relationships among your group. Again, having that personal connection, maybe hosting one-on-ones before getting into the group setting to make sure everyone's comfortable. Responsive circles, so about solving problems or addressing issues. Hey, like this was passed in this school district. How do we approach it? How do we have it to where you speak there? How do we prep you? Things like that, working together on achieving the same goal. And then proactively responsive, about addressing foreseeable problems or challenges and establishing a collective process. How do we get more LGBTQ events to be smoke-free? How do we get more of these, more things to be equitable and accessible to those who might even be immunocompromised, those, who are struggling and want a space that has no tobacco use. So just something along those lines. So that's the spectrum of circles. And then creating circles. So you have the physical circle, where a circle is formed to prevent any visible obstructions from one another. Sitting in a circle, a literal circle does help. Fun fact, a deaf person created the circle table. And it also models the absence of power dynamics or hierarchy. So you don't have like someone sitting at the head of the table type of feel. Or there's no physical like obstruction, like a podium or something where it's like, I'm here to speak, like, and kind of like that. All just meet on like this equal ground that everyone can be a part of the conversation. Then you have the keeper introduces the circle. So a facilitator reminds the group of values and agreements and guides group through the process, making sure everyone is allowed to speak. Everyone gets a chance to say what they want to say. A keeper can be a youth partner or adult. And also talking piece. So if preferred, a talking piece can be introduced. Like I remember like the talking stick or something like that, or from Girl Scouts, like, or like a pillow, something like that. It doesn't even, like, maybe a fidget spinner. But whoever holds the talking piece is the active speaker, and everyone else is the active listener. So making sure that maybe they're taking notes, the head nods, the eye contact, maybe making sure that like, hey, like, can I ask a question really quick? Like, is this going to be like, and then just see how to get to that understanding. And then the centerpiece, if appropriate, you can create a shared space in the middle for meaningful items, notes, or agreements. It could even be like a small picture of a bee that says like, you're the bee's knees, because then it kind of makes like lightens the mood and everything like that too.
Like, can I add one thing for virtual spaces too?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So, and I want you all to think of creating these circles. Sometimes it's physical space, but really it's a process. So even if you are in a virtual space, you can still emulate this. You may not have a talking piece, but you can have some way to indicate who is speaking, everyone else is listening, or really paying that practice in. And then also with the centerpiece, or really it's anything to really beautify the space, create a space to where everyone is able to contribute to that sense of beauty, belonging, and the impacts of that, of everyone feeling that they belong, and this is a space that they're creating. So even virtually, you could start with sort of, I want everyone, we're going to have a whiteboard just kind of as a centerpiece. Go ahead and draw something that you find beautiful, or something that made you feel good this week. Whatever you want to do to really encourage those positive sentiments. And that's really what that centerpiece is about as well.
Yes. And thank you, Ignacio, for sharing that, because as somebody who also facilitates like virtual circles and meetings and stuff, especially with the youth that I work with, I make sure to be like, hey, you all have the floor. What would you like to do? We also have these like hangouts to where they decide like I want to listen to this type of music. Can you play it? And I'm like, okay, cool. And then we'll just have this shared space, or what I learned it as body doubling. So being in the same shared space while working on your own things, that definitely does bring up camaraderie as well. And then we have the circle elements. So introduce the purpose of the circle. Again, you have the circle opening, which can include like poem, quotes, breathing exercises, really recentering yourself with everyone around you, or even guided meditation. And it definitely does help. And introduce guidelines and group values, like establish any group agreements, values, and guidelines. Introduce the talking piece, or / centerpiece. And then connection rounds, invite participants to talk about how they're feeling physically, emotionally, and mentally. Again, those check-ins. And then you have the discussion rounds. Begin the discussion with prompts and allow participants to share their stories and experiences. A good way to do this is like a question of the day as well. That also helps. And checkout and reflection. Take time to synthesize any information and allow for any group of reflection. Like, how do you feel about that workshop we did? How do you feel about the meeting that happened today? How can we improve, and everything like that? And then also close with a poem or a quote. Optional, like, but that again, it's optional. And express gratitude to all participants, like, thank you so much for being here. And I feel like we did this today too, where it's like we came into this amazing circle virtually, and in closing, it's one of those things where it is truly thank you all for being here and for taking time out of your day to be able to attend at whatever capacity you have, because we all greatly appreciate each and every one of you. So thank you. And then I know that we're running close on time, so I was like trying to speed talk. So sorry, everyone.
And then we were planning to go through the process of doing community circle, but we don't have enough time to really give it the proper respect that it deserves. So versus trying to rush through it, what I can do, I'm going to share this link. So Ravina Soto and I, we were collaborating and working together to create spaces and really provide community circles within the community. And we're planning to also create a material, something to look forward to in the future, which is going to be a guide on creating community circles and facilitating them. But for now, here is one of the example sessions that you can use as a model, but I'm going to go ahead and actually share my screen real quick. And just kind of, okay, I think, can everyone see this? Yeah, perfect. Okay, so really how we talked about, we open a circle really beginning with a blessing or reading, and there's no one way to do this. It's and I want us to be creative in going through creating a circle, because even our webinar sessions have been modeled after creating community circles because of the way that we began, the way that we ended, and our process, and really intention within everything that we did throughout the session. So just to put that out there, to share that as an example. But yeah, so kind of really going over what our intentions were, We would also speak on what our objectives are every time. Like, so anytime we were meeting together for our community circle, our goal is to increase self-awareness and develop positive identity, right? So we're we're giving everyone permission to do all of these things, because these are the things that everyone said that we want to build on in this space. We want to practice active listening skills, respectful communication, build community and sense of belonging and interconnectedness, and also process personal experiences in supportive spaces. So again, kind of stating that this is a safe space to share your experiences so we can be supportive for one another. And I'll really, at the base of this community circle, when Ravina and I were speaking, was especially when we're talking about adult coordinators working with young people, and we stated this in the beginning of this webinar session too, a lot of times there's a lot of personal trauma that we have to address and heal, because we've experienced trauma as young people, and some of those experiences we carry on because it's become a norm in how we treat young people and one another in our space. So it was unraveling that through these conversations so that we can have a more positive experience as adults engaging with young people. Okay, so that's really what the base of this community circle was all about. So then we had our agreements, and then we had our prompt, which, for this day, we want to talk on trauma and resilience, because we can't talk about trauma without really elevating and beautifying that idea of resilience, because that, again, is strength-based, talking about how all of us do have resilience, and we have power as well. So yeah, we went through the prompts. Afterwards, we had time to reflect. After we did breakout groups, we let everyone talk in smaller groups, and we came together as a big group to kind of say, okay, what are our takeaways? So ideally, we would have had time to go through this, but again, it would be the worst to go through it in a rushed way and not really respect the process as it should be. So I'm going to go ahead and do a new share back to my screen. But I did share that link, so anyone is able to view that if you'd like to take a look, just to kind of see what the process is like. But again, it can look like this webinar session. It can look like, however you show up in your space with your young people, whatever matters to them, what values they have, whether they want to listen to quotes, listen to poems, or they want to talk about something that popped up in pop culture that is relevant and still applies to life in the way that we are engaging, or it's related to the campaign we're working on. Leave space for that creativity in this process. Just want to really express that as well. Okay. So with that, that is it. And I would love to hear, again, any takeaways from this session, any way that you're planning to really take this information and use it in your spaces. And then we can open the space for that discussion and leave it there. We always end with a quote, so I will share that too right after this.
I just want to say thank you for putting this on. I know a lot of my peers don't necessarily have experience working with youth, so I really appreciate this, and I liked how wide it was. I think also what I really liked about these presentations is that it wasn't necessarily tobacco focused, and it was more how to get youth engaged. And I think with grants, or if you're a teacher, sometimes we have deadlines and there's a lot of pressure to just get ahead and go on with our goals. And so I really like the focus on youth and letting them decide and dictate what this is going to be. And then I wanted to follow up real quick, I'll try to speak quickly for what Ignacio was saying about dealing with trauma. Pretty much I'm just going to assume every person you interact with has some sort of trauma from COVID and then from other things. And so for youth especially, there's been 3 years of COVID where they literally didn't have agency to change the world. There was a worldwide virus, there's climate change, there's constant news of war and stuff. And so we are facing a really, really tough time to get youth to switch the perspective to re-engage and not feel hopeless, and us too. It's not just youth. So thank you again for everything.
Thank you, Raider, and thank you for that expansion too. I really appreciate you talking on that. All right. Anyone else? All right. As always, thank you. Appreciate you all as well. All right, so I'll go ahead and end it with this quote, and this is totally in line with that whole interconnectedness, right? So from Heller Keller, alone we can do so little. Together we can do so much. And that's the point, okay? Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for joining in our webinar series. Celebration that we've completed the third session, and just want to send that appreciation out to you all. Have a wonderful rest of your week.